War. War never changes.
Some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 87, America and Israel. So it's interesting to note that the pro and anti-Israel divide within the United States is transcending parties. There is a pro-Israel wing of the Republican Party and a pro-Israel wing of the Democrat Party, and there is a very anti-Israel wing in both of the parties as well. The normal alignment of parties along foreign policy isn't working when it comes to Israel. And it seems to be more of a generational divide. Older generations being, broadly speaking, more supportive of America having a stronger relationship with Israel, and younger generations kind of going the opposite way in having a negative feeling towards America's traditional relationship with Israel. And in some cases, going to an extreme of seeing Israel as the cause of all the world's various problems. Now, and in support of these arguments, I see a lot of different positions being forwarded, both pro and con to America's relationship, that don't really stand up to any sort of intellectual rigor or historical analysis. So I wanted to kind of go through this, and I admit I am generally on the pro-Israel side, and people who have listened to this podcast for a while have probably recognized that. But I do so from a different perspective than I think a lot of people do. It transcends religious aspects and things like that. So I'm going to kind of go down the pro and anti side, analyze the most common arguments for and against, and critique them and support them or tear them down as I see. As a little free-flowing, I'm kind of going off the head with some few notes. This isn't scripted, so those of you who like this kind of format, great. Those of you who don't, you might want to skip this week's and go on to next week's. But I think it's an important subject. It's hot, it's interesting, and I think it's really interesting, especially how it's transcending normal divides. So since Israel's establishment in 1948, the United States has emerged as Israel's most significant international supporter, providing diplomatic, military assistance, economic aid, and political protection in international forums. The relationship has endured throughout various administrations with ebbs and flows and waxing and waning of that level of support. Proponents argue that U.S. support for Israel advances American strategic interests, democratic values, regional stability. And critics contend the relationship has more strategic costs than benefits, undermines U.S. credibility, and entangles Washington in protracted regional structures. One of the most frequently cited arguments for American support of Israel is strategic utility. Israel has been viewed as a reliable regional partner in a volatile Middle East. During the Cold War, Israel functioned as a de facto counterweight to Soviet-aligned Arab states such as Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. And Israeli intelligence, military innovation, and battlefield performance demonstrated capacity to defeat Soviet-supplied troops, which reinforced U.S. strategic objectives without the deployment of American troops. So this actually carries some weight to it. Unquestionably, a lot of American doctrine for warfighting at the operational level, airland battle, was driven by Israel's experimentation with B.H. Liddell's Hart, JFC Fuller. Their theories were coalesced into Israel operational doctrine, which was tested against Soviet equipment. Many of the first looks at Soviet equipment came from Israel, T-55s, T-62s. Many MiGs that Israel got from defecting Arab pilots were sent over to the United States and provided that equipment for us to get better at defeating the Soviets. Many of the first looks, SA-2s, SA-6s, the SA-7 Grails, those first looks of Soviet anti-air capabilities came from the Israelis and were shared. The SA-2s in particular, many of the later linebacker raids in Vietnam, the jamming pods that were used were Israeli creations. As mentioned in the earlier podcast on drones, modern real-time intelligence drones were first created in Israel, and the first ones that we fielded were Israeli manufactured and sold to the United States. So from a military perspective, Israel has definitely benefited the United States in its preparation for warfare. We would not have done as well as we did against Saddam Hussein in 1991 without Israeli insights. We still would have kicked his ass. Don't get me wrong. It's not a game changer in that regard. However, with growing American influence within the Middle East, so you got to look at Jordan being largely an American ally, Saudi Arabia, largely an American ally, Egypt, largely an American ally, Syria in a complex relationship, but not as directly as antagonistic as it once was. Iran obviously is still out there as an antagonist, but Iran, as a pro-American ally, couldn't really support American interests as far as the gathering of intelligence on Soviet equipment because they had American equipment. So I would say now we don't get that same strategic benefit because the Cold War is over. And the United States is by far the primary supplier of arms to the Middle East. What was true is no longer true. So using that as justification for continued Israeli support doesn't carry as much weight. Now, Israel is still a leader in military technology. Their anti-missile defense is top of the line. We collaborate on Arrow and things of that nature, but it's not as critical as I think it was during the Cold War. This is the one that comes up a lot, and I'm not sure how valid it is. Israel is often described as the Middle East's only liberal democracy with competitive elections, independent judiciary, a free press, and the institutional protections we accept in the Western world. All these things are true. Israel is unique in that regard in that entire region. But I really don't care. We have a good relationship with Saudi Arabia. We have a good relationship with Jordan. We have a good relationship with Egypt. These are monarchies in two of the three. And in the third, it's hard to call El-Sisi, my fellow War College graduate, anything but a dictator. But there are dictators. The form of government from a U.S. strategic perspective is irrelevant. And it's not as if Israel being a democracy is going to spread democracy, or even if spreading democracy would be of any value in the Arab world. Al-Sisi is there because the democratic elected terrorist group, Muslim Brotherhood, took over in Egypt during the Green Revolution when Barack Obama was trying to foster democracy in the Middle East. And what we got was a terrorist organization that immediately went off and was antithetical to American strategic interests. And then Al-Sisi replaced them with a military coup, to which the United States quietly acquiesced because it was for the better. Likewise, in Gaza, Hamas was democratically elected and still enjoys, I would say, the majority support within Gaza. Okay, great, democracy. It's not great. Depends. It depends on whether the outcome of the democratic election benefits or hinders American interests. And I don't believe there's any indication that the Arab world writ large is supportive of the United States. Now, governments ruling the Arab world can be, but they're doing so notwithstanding the population's opinion. The majority of Jordanians, the majority of Saudis, majority of Egyptians are very anti-American. So just because Israel's both democracy and pro-American, I don't think it matters. This is one of those arguments is like, it's the only democracy. Well, I don't care because the democracy is not inherently pro-American. And despite our desires to believe that's the case, Tom Friedman being one of the most notable idiots in this regard, I just don't care. So people can use this as an excuse that why we should support them, but we should only support democracies that support American interests. I'm not saying Israel doesn't, but in and of itself, it's not an argument. And it then becomes the more nebulous, well, we have a moral responsibility because of the Holocaust. And immediately after World War II, I can see the justification. We are, 80 years removed now? So I don't think that justification is there. Israel can stand on its own. And then we go into the military and technological benefits. I think these are very real. Israel is a technology powerhouse. If you ever had a Nokia phone, you had Israeli created and manufactured technology in it. I think all the main chips that were used in Nokia phones came from Israel. Israel manufactures a lot of things. They're a world leader in a lot of different technologies. But whether or not America supports it, this is the argument for democracy. We could still buy the technology. We don't have to support them. It does help us if we want access to technology because we have significant leverage over the Israeli government. But in and of itself, we would have access to Israeli technology, albeit at a greater cost, perhaps, or a little more difficulty, with or without significant American support. And then the real reason is, and this gets into the point of the podcast, Israel still is largely supported in the United States. And it's a combination of things. I think the older generations, and I'm probably a little too young to get in on this, they remember Israel as being the scrappy underdog facing massive armies dedicated to their eradication. Israel was the underdog. Younger generations don't view Israel in that regard. They see them as a powerhouse, and they see the United States as the cause of this powerhouse status. And so they've gone from scrappy underdog to perceived bully. And that's part of the messaging that the Arabs have been very successful in. Up until the late 80s, it was the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now it's the Israel-Palestine conflict. The Arab world, while still supportive of the Palestinian cause, have largely kind of dropped the attempt at eradicating Israel. Jordan and Egypt certainly have. They have formal peace treaties with Israel. With the Abraham Accords, many traditional belligerents to Israel, such as Saudi Arabia, are making peace overtures with them. And with Syria's Assad regime no longer in power, we have to kind of see what Jelani, or whatever he's calling himself today, is going to go with. But that older generation's viewpoint of Israel just doesn't hold water. And I can't say the American education system is going to teach the history that shows the early weakness of Israel versus how they are viewed today. Israel's a much stronger country than it was, and unquestionably, American support has put them in that position. Does that mean we still have to support them as we did before? Obviously, the argument is not as strong. Now, on the arguments against, the biggest thing I hear is that Israel is a strategic liability, and that by our support for Israel, Muslim world in general, the Arab world in particular, is anti-American. I don't think that's true. I think those communities are going to hate the United States no matter what we do. And we tried this experiment, and that's one of the things we'll get into a little bit later, is we tried buying the Arab world's support by abandoning Israel. This happened in 1956 with the Suez Campaign. We'll get into the second reason right now, and then we can kind of delve off to some historical vignettes. One of the complaints is Israel dominates the United States, and we have always done their bidding no matter what they want. It's unconditional support. That's just flat out a lie. In many regards, we often go against Israeli interests. We provide support up to a certain degree, up to a certain point, and then we tell Israel, this is what you're going to do. The money we supply them, the military arms we supply them, gives us significant leverage over Israeli politics. So in 1956, Suez Campaign, you can go back and re-listen to that, but the United States told Israel, you will withdraw from Gaza, you will withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula, you will withdraw from the Suez Canal. You don't have a choice here. You will do this, or the United States military will get involved and remove Israeli forces, using UN and whatnot. Now, in exchange for that, the United States promised that the Straits of Tiran and the Gulf of Aqaba would always be open to Israeli shipping. The cause of the 1956 war was Egypt shutting down the Straits of Tiran, which gave access to the port of Eilat and the Gulf of Aqaba. And Israel, by gaining control of the Sinai Peninsula, gained control of the Straits of Tiran. So the UN peacekeeping force was brought in 1956. They took over Sharm el-Sheikh, which guarded and controlled entrance into the Gulf of Aqaba. And the United States explicitly promised the Israeli government that they would always maintain the free passage for Israeli shipping. Then in 1967, Nasser kicks out the UN peacekeeping force and shuts down the Straits of Tiran and the Gulf of Aqaba to Israeli shipping. Israel goes to the United States and says, we withdrew based upon your promises that we would maintain access. And the Johnson administration said, well, that was a political promise, but it wasn't a treaty. So too bad. So there are two instances where the American government, and they said this explicitly, if we support Israel, we will lose the support of the Arab world. Well, so they abandoned Israel and went against Israeli interests in 1956, hoping to gain favor with Nasser, who still went squarely into the Soviet sphere. Now, Nasser played the American government brilliantly, pretending that by abandoning Israel and working against Israeli interests, that he would be more supportive of American geopolitical objectives vis-a-vis the Cold War. He lied. Americans bought it, and we screwed over Israel to try to gain a stronger foothold in a critical region. I mean, the Sinai Peninsula and certainly the Suez Canal is critical. And we tried, and it failed. It didn't work. But the idea that we've always had unconditional support for Israel is foolishness. And again, in 1967, we worked against Israeli interests. Even in 1973, the United States government told Golda Meir's government explicitly, you cannot attack first. You must receive the first blow from the Arabs if you want any American support. That got Israelis killed, and it caused the fall of the Meir government. But American support bought us that. But we worked directly against Israeli interests in 1973 in dictating that the Israelis had to be attacked first by stronger militaries. Finally, in 1982, when we sent Marines into Beirut, we sent the Marines into Beirut to protect the Palestine Liberation Organization from the Israeli Defense Force. We were actively working to defend a terrorist organization that was antithetical to both American interests and Israeli interests. That's why we went. And then 240 Marines were killed by an Iranian proxy, which later became Hezbollah. So 56, 67, 73, and 82, we took actions which were against Israeli interests, but were for American interests. So I bring all this up that anyone who says, we've given unconditional support to Israel and we give them whatever they want, that isn't true. The current ceasefire in Iran and the current ceasefire in Gaza were against Israeli wishes. Israel wants the IRGC gone and they want Hamas gone. President Trump came in and said, no, we're going to have a ceasefire and we'll see what happens afterwards. That was not what Israel and Netanyahu wanted, but it's what America forced down their throats. Now, I will say in the Iranian example, that was the first time in the American-Israeli relationship that American forces took combat, kinetic action against Israel's army during an ongoing conflict. That had never happened before. Now, it's very precise, and the Iranian regime has promised destruction of both the great Satan, a.k.a. us, and the little Satan, a.k.a. Israel. So we did attack an enemy of the United States, not merely an enemy of Israel, but it was unprecedented. But that was the cost of Israel stopping attacks on the Iranian regime before they had gained their political objectives. And you can see it was just a ceasefire, and Iran and the IRGC have been very vocal in stating their desire to still develop nuclear weapons and their belligerence to the United States. If that ceasefire was wise, I don't know. I do think President Trump is very motivated by a Nobel Peace Prize, and I think it causes him to be easily swayed, if not played, by foreign governments. I think that certainly happened in Iran and in Gaza as well. And of course, there's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that was a great judo move geopolitically by the Arabs to frame it in that regard. But this goes back to Israel's the only democracy. Don't care. Palestinians are losing to Israel. Also, don't care. I mean, I don't care if Hamas loses. The plight of the Palestinian people has no significant meaning to the United States whatsoever. In the absence of a true desire of a two-state solution, war is inevitable. And in the framework of the Muslim world versus the Western world and Israel versus the Western world, Israel is part of the Western world, at least in the eyes of the Arabs and the Muslims, that is, I'm going to side with Israel simply because they do have shared values of the United States. It's not why we should support them, but it's also not an idea that I should care significantly about what happens to the Arabs. It's not my problem. Another thing we talk about that I hear is Israel only exists because of American aid. This is flat out false. American aid to Israel now consists almost entirely of the $3 billion we continually give them of military aid. And this was a prerequisite of Israel withdrawing from the Sinai Peninsula again. We made them withdraw in 1956, and then they had the War of 1967. In 1973, Israel held up. In 1967, Israel recaptured the Sinai, and in the peace treaty with Egypt, they gave up the Sinai and control the Suez, which makes $8 to $9 billion every year for Egypt. And the cost of that is, well, we are giving up strategic depth. We are weakening ourselves militarily to the benefit of Egypt, our enemy at the time. I'm speaking for the Israelis here, the Israelis' enemy at the time. Israel's perspective, you are making us strategically weaker. If you want us to do this, we have to be compensated in some way to maintain our defensive capabilities. And that cost was the military aid, which became codified following the Camp David Accords in 1979. It's important to note that for every 60 cents we give to Israel in military aid, we give another 40 cents to Egypt. So it's not as if Israel alone gets this. But I will not question whatsoever that Israel does get the preponderance of American aid throughout its existence. It's unquestionable. But in some years, it was very small, especially in the pre-1967. Nixon was the first American president to provide substantial military and other aid to Israel, and that carried through all the way to today. But the aid was both military and economic. Now the aid is almost entirely military by buying American goods. So it's not like a lot of cash goes to Israel. What's going to Israel is American manufactured military goods. And I think Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon are just as interested in maintaining that relationship as the government of Israel is. And it's not as if we withdrew from that aid. Israel has a robust high technology capability. They could make their own fighter jets. They can make pretty much everything that the United States supplies to them. It's just frankly cheaper when the American taxpayer is giving to them for free. It's not advocating for them doing so, but it has to be remembered that aid to Israel, the military aid, was because the United States took something from Israel and gave it to Egypt, and that was the price that we paid from that. And then more of the argument that by supporting Israel, it lessens our standing within the Muslim world. However, the success of the Abraham Accords flies in the face of that argument. For decades, the State Department, which has a heavy anti-Israel bent to it by the simple nature that the vast majority, there's 50 times more diplomats assigned to Arab countries than there are to Israel, to the one Jewish country. So you have 50 times as many diplomats in the State Department who are pro-Arab, or at least more sympathetic to the Arab cause than they are to the Israeli cause. The State Department argued it is impossible for the United States to support Israel because Israel and the Arab countries are incapable of ever coming to any sort of agreement. So all support to Israel undermines our role in the Middle East. The Abraham Accords, the peace treaty of Jordan and Egypt have rendered that analysis invalid. Frankly, the State Department got it wrong. It turns out the governments that run those countries don't care too much about what's happening in Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinians as much as the Arab people do. But the Arab people are, in the Arab world, largely locked out of the rings of power. That's the anti-democracy argument going on there. So I don't think that argument carries a lot of weight. I guess to all of this is, and this goes, obviously I'm ignoring the whole we have to support Israel because they're Jewish and the Bible and whatnot. That's, I respect those who use that as an argument because of their faith. However, it's irrelevant to American foreign policy. They're entitled to their opinion, but in a dispassionate analysis of the pro and anti-Israel support, I don't think it carries a lot of weight. So what does all this say? Where do I stand? One, Israel would be fine without American support, American military aid. What it would do, however, if we were to remove that aid, is Israel would have less options, which means they would have to take probably more extreme measures. It wouldn't lessen casualties because Israel would still fight. There would still be war. It's just Israel would have to fight it with, less options available to them, which might lead to more extreme outcomes to the Arab world. And the second thing is, if we dried up all aid, we get no say. There's no peace in Gaza. There's no ceasefire in Iran. Israel would have no reason whatsoever to listen to what the United States says, unless the argument is, well, then the United States should invade Israel and conquer them and bend them to our will. I don't think that's a starter, but I would suspect that many of the most vociferous anti-Israel voices on the right and the left ultimately would seek the destruction of the Israeli state and would be more than pleased if the United States was at the head of that effort. I don't mean to be quite so negative on it, but it's really quite nasty out there. I will say on the left, the anti-Israel bent is seen in an anti-colonialist, anti-Western style viewpoint. They see Israel as, the colonist, and you have the victim-victimizer dichotomy. Israel is not a victim. They're actually a very successful society. Ergo, they must have victimized someone to get there. And I think that's where the left-wing anti-Israel foundation is going on. On the right wing, I think the anti-Zionist, anti-Israel rhetoric is actually more of an anti-Jewish viewpoint where they see prominent Jewish power brokers. I can't even say politicians, people like George Soros or Zuckerberg or whatnot, who they don't like. And it's still kind of politically untenable to be overtly anti-Jewish. And much as the Arab world will say, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm anti-Zionist, well, they're anti-Jewish. If you listen to them in Arabic. I think on the American right, anti-Zionism is the mask for, I just don't like Jews, and I certainly don't like the Jewish state. And I think that's where it's coming from. Now, this is just my opinion. I could be wrong. In the end, I still think we owe Israel simply because we have weakened their strategic position time and time again. But I think the debt's been paid. And if Raytheon and Boeing want to continue to lobby the U.S. government to give Raytheon and Boeing products, and of course Lockheed Martin, how could I forget, to Israel on the taxpayer dime, I get why they're doing it. I think ultimately our diplomatic support to Israel doesn't cost us much as people want to say. And I think people have their own reasons for being anti-Israel. And I think that neither of the reasons on the right or the left are actually forwarding American policy objectives. In the end, I measure a country on whether they seek a weaker America or a stronger America. And for much of the world, they would like to see a weaker America, and they work towards those ends. And unfortunately, I see the EU. The EU was designed as a counterweight to American power, designed so that America wouldn't be as strong internationally as it is. Israel is one of the few countries that unequivocally benefits from a strong America because we are their ally. And because they don't seek to undermine or hurt America's overall capability, power, economic strength, any of the diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, Israel benefits from a strong America uniquely among a lot of countries. Therefore, if I have to choose a side, I'm going to choose Israel against its enemies. It doesn't mean that I'm abandoning Israel's efforts. It's just Israel has a very quantifiable and describable desire for America to be as strong as possible, which should ultimately be the objective of American foreign policy. And so therefore, support for Israel supports that aspect because Israel wants us strong, I want us strong. They're the better of two options, but I'm not totally heartbroken one way or the other. Israel could stand on their own. I don't think those who think Israel needs America would be very happy if America lost its ability to dictate to Israel how it conducts its military operations. I don't think it would go the way they think it would go. So anyways, I just want to throw that out there, some food for thought. It's a hot topic right now. I babbled a little bit. I really don't care. That's the nature of these episodes. I'll be back next week with some good American battle that you've probably heard of and give you a little bit of analysis on that in the more scripted format. My thanks again to everybody who supports the channel, and I'll talk to you guys next week.
Thanks for listening today. If you want to help the show, please share today's episode on any social media sites you can. Check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for more information and to send me a message. And, of course, my thanks to the subscribers who help keep the show going. Hope you all join me next week. See you soon.